Hey everyone, Laura here.
Tanya here.
We've been friends for over a decade and worked together for a long time in call centers as agents, quality analysts, managers, and supervisors.
In 2018, we started up this podcast to talk about the batshit bonkers bullshit we see and continue to see in our time at work and at home as consumers.
This episode, however, is unique. We do these deep dive episodes where we talk about corporate scandals like Enron, scams like Theranos, or even cons like Scientology.
This is one of those episodes, so enjoy.
Love your faces.
Smooches.
This call may be monitored and recorded for quality assurance.
This job would be great if it wasn't for the fucking customers.
You're always this stupid. It is you take lessons. Just calm down.
Oh, fuck you!
You can't handle the truth.
This call may be monitored and recorded for quality assurance.
In other words, be nice, asshole.
Welcome to a very special set of episodes of Q's and Cucumber. I'm Laura Mack.
And I'm Tanya Edwards.
So today we are going to record just one big, long, giant episode that we will probably split up into 3 or 4 episodes down the line. This is our deep dive into Enron, which I have been studying this for like 3 weeks, a month, and I need to get this story out of my fucking brain.
Bad.
It literally has been giving me nightmares what these people fucking did. Now, I'm going to kick this off by telling everybody, because the book is like 15 hours long. When I watched the documentary, which is only about an hour and a half, I had like little questions like, well, I want to know the backstory to that, or how do they know that, and all this stuff.
Right.
The book gives so many more details, and the book is so goddamn worth it. So if you listen to this and you have questions, like it's stuff that I don't answer, please, please, please listen to or read the books, because that more than likely they will actually answer your question. One of the authors of the book, Bethany McLean, she actually says at the beginning of the documentary, and she's right, people think that the story of Enron is about numbers, about these complicated transactions. And while part of that is true, it really is just about people and this human tragedy story. And it really is tragic. I mean, it wound up causing one guy to commit suicide.
That's awful.
Over it. Like, it's tragic.
All in the name of money.
Yeah, pretty much.
Greed.
Like, what happens when you give people no direction, tell them they're the smartest people in the world, and say, go make money? That's really what they did.
We end up with the Trump family. That's what happens.
And honestly, there are some parallels to Trump. And I know we try really hard not to talk about politics, but honestly, there are some really crazy like correlations to this story. So just so y'all know, we're going to try really hard not to just Trump bash at all, but it's too crazy to not point out, quite frankly. As Jimmy Z said, like the reason he wanted us to talk about this is because Enron is the reason that we exist, that our jobs exist. It's really to make sure that the company, the employees, and your customers are protected. And it really kind of showed me, once again, through this lens of 15 years of being a QA, as to why we are necessary. People within your company that are willing to stand up and go, yo, not right.
Right.
Shut it down, people. Like, not cool. And ultimately, there are some points that's not made in the documentary, but in the book. Because I just kept wondering when I was watching the documentary, where were the internal auditors, like the compliance, the quality auditors like us?
Right.
Where the fuck were they? And I fucking found out. And when we get there, you're going to be like, holy shit. If Chucky's had this system that they had, oh my God. We would have been on the chopping block in a hot minute. I want to acknowledge the source material and a couple of things to keep in mind. Number one, like I said, Smartest Guys in the Room by Bethany McLean and Pete Elkind. But back to Bethany McLean. I love her. She wrote, and we'll get into this a little bit later, but basically she was one of the first people to really publicly, because she's she's a reporter, and she wrote an article basically that the title of it, I believe, is Enron overpriced? And she asked a very simple question in the article. How does Enron make its money? and nobody could tell her. And looking back on it, she even says, like, it was kind of a tepid article, but it was the first kind of crack to make everybody in the financial world go, wait a minute, what's going on here?
Right.
So she's absolutely wonderful. I love her. She's very soft spoken. She's very sweet, and she really dove into it like in a way that it takes some guts to really stand up and question things that nobody else does.
Right.
And she did. So that book is absolutely fantastic. It is so worth the read. And I did the audiobook, so I got to listen to it while TJ was sick this week, like, watching Puppy Dog Pals.
And you're listening to it?
I'm listening to it, taking note. The other book is called Power Failure by Mimi Schwartz and Sharon Watkins. Like I said last week, Sharon is Sherron. Mimi Schwartz is a reporter, and Sharon Watkins was basically the whistleblower from Enron. And and
that takes a lot of guts.
Totally.
Especially when, you're making money. I mean, not as much as them, but you're comfortable, and you know that you're probably set to make even more money. That takes a lot of guts.
And when we get into the details, you'll actually get a better sense of how much guts it really took. It took a lot of guts. And listening to reading that book and hearing about her, she does kind of sound like us, right? Which is really funny. She's brash. She takes no shit from anybody. I guess she's.
I like how you call us brash.
We are brash. Like one of her favorite things to curse is to call people like dickweeds and stuff like that, and would kind of take people aback who are used to these like charming Southern belles, and she was like, fuck that. Like, she's very, like, she talks about being raised in the Lutheran church, and she's a very strong person of faith, but at the same time,
she's not going to take any shit.
She doesn't take any shit from anybody. Like, she honestly sounds like a badass. And we'll get there. But those
I want to meet her.
And this is what I wrote on here. She ultimately helped to take down Enron while she was trying to save it. And
she's trying to save them from themselves, basically. Yeah.
But basically, like, that may sound bad on the surface, but honestly, in my mind, she's a hero. Full stop, period. She's a hero, right? And we'll get into what happens after she testifies before Congress, because the response is actually kind of funny and amazing. Okay. So those are the source materials. I highly, highly, highly recommend everybody buy those books, buy the audiobooks, read them. They're going to go into a lot of details that we obviously can't. Now, on this show, I want to clarify, I am not an accountant or a financial analyst. There's parts of this that I don't quite understand, but I get the gist of enough. So we're not really going to focus too much on the actual transactions, more on what those transactions did, how it affected people, and how the whole system was set up to let those transactions happen.
What I understand is people do this. From Enron to Martha Stewart to even this dotard we got in the White House, right? People do this stuff. And they think that nobody's going to catch them.
Right.
They think that there's not a checks and balances. Like there's always somebody watching. Big Brother, the government, the IRS, whoever. Somebody is always watching. Totally. So to think that you're able to pull the sneaky Pete on somebody for 20 years... at some point, you're going to get caught.
But once again,
I'm too afraid to do all that shit.
You know me. I'm principal's office of life. Like, no.
Right.
But it really is one of those things where it's like, these people, and the title of the book kind of says it all. They believed they were the smartest guys in the room and that they could outsmart anybody. Like, at one point, when Jeff Skilling actually goes to testify before Congress... because Ken Lay took the fifth, but Jeff Skilling testified. He truly believed that he could go in there and explain it away. And it was like the hubris that just that took.
He said, just let me explain to you real quick.
Right. Let me explain to you how I fucked everyone.
And then everything's cool, right?
Right.
Yeah. No, fuck you.
Like, he is famous for having said, like, after the collapse, when they asked him about all the people that lost their jobs and their savings and everything else, his response was, shit happens. Now, he's still in prison.
Good.
Thank you. He's supposed to be released sometime in the next, like, year or two. But I'm just like,
But he's in Club Fed, so he's not like in there with Johnny and the boys getting his ass tore up every night. He's in
his ass tore up every night.
He's in Club Fed, so he's like folding laundry and learning how to cook new shit.
Pretty much.
There's really
piece of shit.
Why can't we get morels?
I know, right? Good Lord.
What it wouldn't do for a good truffle oil.
Okay. So a couple of things I really want everybody to keep in mind as we go through these. There's three things. One is, two are mentioned in the Smartest Guys in the Room and the documentary. And one I see a correlation with, and I could be wrong. But number one is the Milgram experiment. The Milgram experiment was done, I believe, in the early 60s. 1961. And at the time, we weren't too far off from the end of World War II and the full revelation of what had really happened in the concentration camps, etc. There was also a point where around this time, the trial of one of the famous Nazi camp guys, right? He had been captured and he was going on trial. And the question that Milgram was asking was, can average people be evil? Yeah. Whether they're evil or not, can they be put into a situation? Because what all these Nazi soldiers were saying was, we were just following orders. Can you get average people to do unspeakably tragic things?
Yeah, you can.
Just because a person in a perceived position of authority tells you it's okay.
Look at reality TV.
I know, right?
Survivor.
I know.
Come on now.
It's gross.
Who in the right fucking mind acts like that?
I know.
You take 10 people, throw them on an island and tell them figure it the fuck out, basically, is what they're doing. Oh, and I think that, if it's a survival of the fittest kind of thing, which is what that was, then you're going to do some stuff to make sure that your family is taken care of, that you're still alive. Right. I think that if somebody put you in a room and said you have to gnaw off your own arm, you're going to do it.
Right.
It
just, yeah. So for those of you who don't know what the Milgram experiments is, I'll explain how they broke it down. You have the person who is the actual subject of the experiment does not know he's a subject, right? And what they did was they put him in a room and another person in a room, right? They told the person who was the subject of the experiment that this was an experiment to see if mild electric shocks could help people memorize lists. So there's another person who's an actor in the other room, and this person is like, the actual subject is like pressing a button, and the voltage gets higher and higher and higher every time they get it wrong. The person in the other room isn't hooked up to anything, but they're screaming like they are, right? And there's a guy in a white lab coat that sits in the room, and all he is allowed to say to the person administering the shocks is, the experiment must continue, right? So they read a list. The person has to read the list back. If they get it wrong, they get a shock. And the shocks get worse and worse and worse. Right. To the point where it goes up to 450 volts, which is kill you level, right? 65% of them shocked to the death. 65%.
I don't think I could do that.
I couldn't. Now, here's what's crazy.
Fuck you, it's a list.
I know, right?
Jesus.
Here's what they said. Subjects were uncomfortable doing so and displayed varying degrees of tension and stress. These signs included sweating, trembling, stuttering, biting their lips, groaning, digging their fingernails into their skin, and some were even having nervous laughing fits or even seizures.
I would have thrown up.
It stressed them out so bad. So you can leave. You don't have to do this.
So what? Okay. So, and I've heard about this before, right? Mm-hmm. But what I never knew and I never thought to ask until just this second, like, so was there some sort of like compensation?
I think so.
Like if you get them to memorize this list, then we give you,
I think so,
$100 or something. I mean, yeah, if there was some sort of compensation, I can see people, pushing the button. But there's a point, where this is my conscience is not worth whatever you're trying to give me.
Right. And here's the thing is they say every participant paused the experiment at least once to question it. Every one of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Most continued after being assured by the experimenter. Some said they would refund the money. Yep, they were paid. Some said they would refund the money they were paid for participating if they could just leave.
Yeah,
The participants who refused to administer the final shocks neither insisted that the experiment be terminated nor left the room to check on the health of the victim without requesting permission to leave. So what that means is they didn't go check to see if the person they were shocking was okay. And they still looked at the experimenter, or the person in the lab coat, and said, do I have permission?
No,
right? It's this weird thing of like the person in the position of authority is telling you it's okay, and you've handed yourself and your own free will willingly over to them.
And
this
says a lot about how people can be manipulated as well.
Exactly.
And manipulation is a bitch. It is a bitch.
Totally.
And when somebody can manipulate your mind to where you're asking them permission to leave from doing something that is so wrong. I mean,
it's crazy. This experiment has been replicated over the world. That experiment was just nothing but men.
Right.
The numbers went down a little bit when they included women, but it still was over 50%.
Yeah.
Which is crazy, right?
Yeah. Bitches are crazy.
It's just crazy that we were okay with this. Like, once again, it's discussing like Nazis, like when people are, I wouldn't have done it. Well, you
don't
sure?
know, because you have this man that is clearly unhinged, running a country, he thinks, and a certain set of people are less than human.
Right.
And we need to dispose of them. They're cockroaches. And we need to get rid of all the cockroaches. Yep. And I don't care how you do it, you're going to do it. And that's some scary shit that somebody can mind fuck you that much to get you to haul people into a gas chamber.
But don't think that that's something that only a few evil people will do.
No. There are people.
65% of people shocked to the death.
There are people walking around on the street that you're probably sitting next to them right now while you're listening to this that would shock somebody to death.
Totally. Just because somebody in a perceived position of authority said, go ahead and do it. I accept accountability. Because one guy actually in the video, he actually says, like, do you accept all responsibility? And the guy was like, the responsibility is mine. Please continue. Like, so it's like, I'm not.
Yeah, okay, I'll kill someone as long as I don't have to go to prison for it.
Right.
What the and that's what Hitler did with all of these soldiers that he had. This is my call. I'm telling you to take these people to this gas chamber.
Exactly.
We need to get rid of them. It's for the greater good. Blah blah blah. And
here's the thing. I come from a household where you question authority. You don't blindly follow anybody for anything. And I think it has really, it's in looking at my career, it is why I've been in the positions I've been in, where I'm sitting in a room and I've got 5 upper managers twisting my arm to do something that I considered to be completely unethical, where I wasn't like just blindly following. If you remember that whole thing, they pushed me and kept twisting my arm and saying that all the jobs in the site would be lost if I didn't do this and blah, 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 trying to threaten me and making me feel guilty. Every trick in the bag they pulled out, and I just kept saying, no, it's wrong. It's unethical. Fuck off. So I feel like I would say no, but not everybody would. Like 65% of people
won't say no.
Shocked to the fucking death.
Right.
So who knows? At the same time, I also don't want to pass judgment on these people going, well, they're clearly not strong enough. Like, that's not...
Right.
It's something to keep in mind, and it's not excusing what these people did, but it's something to keep in mind while we're discussing this in particular.
Because they get you, I mean, money. Totally. And that's what it all comes down to is money. If I tell you, Laura, look, I got this deal. I know we're both struggling, but I have a way, a surefire way. Me and you are gonna make $1 million each. It's gonna take us about 6 months to get there, the payoff, and then after that, we're just selling easy. Let's do this. And I tell you what it is, but you got to step on 10 other people that you love or that you hold dear to you or that you even have somewhat of a decent relationship with. You have to grind them down to the ground. How many people, honestly, how many people would do it? How many people wouldn't do it? I mean, you know,
and that actually kind of leads into the second thing I want everybody to keep in mind. There's a book called The Selfish Gene. I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole into this because God knows it can be. The book was published and the author has kind of contradicted himself in subsequent interviews, basically saying like he used the wrong terminology that caused people to misinterpret it. But it's for our purposes here, like I said, don't want to get too far down the rabbit hole on this. For our purposes, basically, what Jeff Skilling believed was that he loved this book, was that the point of the book is saying that human beings are only driven by selfishness and greed in the pursuit of propagating the species, basically. And he believed, Jeff Skilling kind of took this and made it as an ideology of saying money is the only thing that motivates people, period. It's the only thing, which I don't believe is true. I don't believe it's the only thing that motivates
You know what? I don't
people.
believe that's true because in our position, right, we have to find ways to motivate people. And sometimes, it is money. Sometimes it's money. Sometimes it's that recognition. Sometimes there are different.
It's just a day off.
Sometimes, it's an hour off the phones. It's whatever, But it's different. But I would say a majority of people are motivated by money.
But they took that and
but to a point.
Right, and they took that and they turned it into a religion.
Right.
Within Enron.
Jesus, this is like the Scientology of business.
Totally. Now the third thing.
Do they have a Martian too?
Right. Xenu. The intergalactic space lord. Fuck Scientology. Anyway. They're going to send Scientologists are going to be at my door in the morning. So the other thing I wanted to touch on, and this was not in any of the books or anything, but this popped into my mind, and I kind of see a correlation here, and I could be wrong. But it's the Stanford prison experiment.
That shit was weird.
Right.
I watched that movie.
I know, right? Okay, 1971, the experiment that attempted to investigate the psychological effects of perceived power, focusing on the struggle between prisoners and prison officers. It was conducted at Stanford University between August 14th to August 20th, 1971 by a research group. In the study, volunteers were randomly assigned to be either guards or prisoners in a mock prison, with Zimbardo, who was the professor, himself serving as the superintendent. Two of the prisoners left mid-experiment, and the whole experiment was abandoned after 6 days. The results seemed to show that students quickly embraced their assigned roles, with some guards enforcing authoritarian measures and ultimately subjecting some prisoners to psychological torture, while many of the prisoners passively accepted the psychological abuse by the officer's request, actively harassed other prisoners who tried to stop it. The experiment is one of the most famous psychological experiments of all time and is covered in most introductory social psychology experiments. It's one of those things where it was like we're put in this position of this person's in power, this person's a prisoner. No matter which one you were, I'm just going to accept that this is the power structure. I'm not going to question it. The prisoners could have left at any time.
And
Most
stayed.
didn't. Only 2 left.
Yeah.
Right?
That's what was.
And it was like the prison guards really seemed to be like, in this world, I'm in charge. I make the rules. And it really, in thinking about Enron, it really did feel like they were told, we are the smartest people in the room. We lead this industry. People follow us. We're in charge. We've created this world and we own it. And it really feels like these, and I could be wrong, but I see a correlation here to these people having no oversight. The SEC was nowhere. Arthur Anderson was nowhere. Vincent and Elkins was nowhere. The board wasn't holding anybody accountable because there was no accountability. These people seemed to fall into, and because the culture was driven by the selfish gene bullshit.
Yeah.
It really feels like the Stanford prison experiment as in Enron.
So
does that make sense at all?
No, it does to me. It does to me because I accidentally ran across the Stanford prison experiment. I saw it. It was a movie. That's how I found out what it was. Not too long ago, it was a movie. Mm-hmm. I watched it. I had to rewatch it because I was like, wait, what did I miss?
Right.
Like, what the hell? Mm-hmm. So I watched it a couple of times and then I looked it up.
Right.
And I was like, okay.
Right.
I get this now. And I can kind of see where you're going with it. Cause these, honestly, you knew the shit was wrong.
Right.
You knew this was illegal. You knew it was wrong.
And we'll get into the recordings of the traders flat out saying that they're stealing money.
Right.
They knew it. And they casually talked about it on recorded lines.
You knew this
You knew this was
wrong, but this man had you so buffaloed that you thought you were above everyone because y'all were smarter than everyone else.
Yeah.
And at any point you could have pulled out and said, you know what? I can't do this. This is wrong. Mm-hmm. This is wrong on so many levels, but you chose to stay because you felt like it gave you power. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's what it, yeah.
Totally. Okay. So.
Now that we broke it down psychologically and got your brain all fucked up.
I know, right? Congratulate. Are you evil? No.
I have a button. Does anybody want to push it?
I know, right? Good Lord. Let's talk about the founder of Enron, Ken Lay. He was born in Missouri. He was the son of Ruth and Omer Lay. The name Omer just fucking cracks me up. Omer. They owned a feed store, but they were fucking like dirt poor. And their whole business at one point was wiped out after one of their trucks that was carrying a load of chickens crashed and they all died. And it literally sunk the whole business.
Oh my God.
Right? Like, they really, really struggled. But Ken Lay always believed, like, that things would get better. Like, he tells these stories about, like, sitting on a tractor and dreaming about the world of business. Like, he'd seen, like, that was his vision of his future.
Right.
Right? And he kind of willed it into existence, quite frankly.
That's why people have dream boards.
Exactly. Like, I have a dream board.
Yeah,
right?
I need to make one.
Yeah, totally. And we got to feng shui it, too.
Yeah.
That's the other thing, by the way, for Laura Mac Consulting. If you need help with feng shui, I find that so goddamn helpful.
One time, Laura came to my house and had me make had me paint a rock green. Mm-hmm. All I had was fingernail polish. Don't judge me. So we painted this rock green and found a corner outside of my apartment. And the outside was like oddly shaped. And we found this corner and it was to help me like with money and stuff. And I was financially okay within a month of doing that. I mean, it was just crazy.
So Nathan's upstairs. I'll tell this story real quick because it's a little crazy. Grace had been sick for a long time, and that's a very, very long story. Nathan's mom. She'd been sick for a very long time, and she was trying to get on Social Security disability. And she was also trying to get all of her student loans waived, which if you are permanently disabled, they can do that.
I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. And she's been struggling for a long ass time trying to get it done. And her apartment was shaped a little weird like that. And the money corner was basically missing from her apartment, just like yours was, right? And I was like, So... But, it's an apartment. I wanted to make sure it wasn't moved. So I took those green, like, coffee stopper things that Starbucks gives you.
Yeah.
And I went out, and she didn't know I did this. And I stuck it in the ground right where that corner should be. That basically, like, completes that section, right?
Yeah.
And it was like a week later. She got word that her Social Security was approved. She ended up getting a big check. I have to ask Nathan how much it was. And they waived all of her student loans.
Yeah.
And I told her I did that. And she was like, bitch, you couldn't have done that a year ago. I was like, sorry, I didn't know. Like,
yeah. Like,
I love feng shui. And if you don't want to go with me, you can look up at least the book that I love is it's called Move Your Stuff, Change Your Life. It's so awesome. Sophia, she's one of those people that it's done wonders for her. Like, it works for her in ways that I've never seen work.
In the last 5 years, her life
is totally different.
Has totally changed.
Like, she had moved in with us, and she was trying to get a job in Oklahoma to move with her boyfriend. And I wrote on a little sticky note in our career section in the house, Sophia will find a job in Oklahoma City that pays the same or more than she's making right now within the next 30 days. On the 30th day, she got that job offer and moved down there. And I went down to Oklahoma to help her move into her apartment and help feng shui it. Like, it works for her in ways that are crazy. Yeah. And here's the thing. It's not magic. It's not voodoo. All it is arranging your stuff in a way that helps your mind psychologically be organized and stimulated in the right ways for wherever you are. Like, it's really cool. So something to keep in mind. But back to Ken Lay.
Don't put your
It completely wiped them out. It can I know, right?
Every time I say that's what I keep thinking of. Don't put your eggs in one basket.
Don't put your eggs in one basket. After the feed store was pretty much wiped out, his father ended up becoming a door-to-door stove salesman, which I'm like, oh my God, how do you knock on the door and be like, please take the stove?
Do you carry it around with you?
I don't know. I'm assuming you don't, but that's just, or you just drive around a truck and be like, pick one. That's the only thing I can imagine.
Door-to-door stove salesman. Was this hat? No, I don't even know.
I don't even want to know. So Ken Lay really just believed from like, his father was a Baptist minister, and he had this, like, he always kind of wrapped himself in the Bible and his morals and, presented that to the world, but he certainly wasn't walking the walk. We'll get to that. But he really believed like the world of business was his ticket out. And he really had his mind set on that. And ultimately, that's what he became. That's what he did. He went to the University of Missouri where he studied economics. He got his PhD in economics from the University of Houston. In 1968, Ken entered the Officer Candidate School for the United States Navy. He was in the Navy from 68 to 71. He ended up working all over Washington for different departments, from the Federal Power Commission to the Department of the Interior, thanks in part to one of his college professors pulling some strings so that he wouldn't actually have to serve in Vietnam. Now, he would later claim that this was divine intervention.
Yeah, right.
But really, it was just somebody did him a fucking favor. Like, okay.
It wasn't Jesus, it was Bob.
It was Bob. So he impressed everyone with his hard work. And basically, he ended up being able to just call up somebody before he left government, his contacts that he had cultivated, and said, hey, give me a job. And they gave him a job.
Oh, you got to be pretty damn good at what you're doing.
Totally.
To just call somebody and say, you know what? Mm-hmm. I'm available. Do you want me?
Exactly.
So the man is not stupid.
No, not at all. Now, during this period in the 70s is when we had the big gas shortage. And he really became like an apostle for deregulation. He really believed that in the magic of the marketplace, that if you handed a problem over to the free market, that they would just fix it. Like, supply would go up, prices would go down, and companies could make a fortune.
I'm pretty sure.
Like, the free market is goddamn expensive for consumers sometimes. Right. Not all the time, but sometimes. So, Christ, we'll get there. So, he took that job, and during there were a bunch of mergers and acquisitions of the companies he worked for. He kind of bounced around to different roles. He started as a fucking VP.
Way to work your way up to the top.
I know. I wish I could make a fucking phone call and be a fucking vice president. Like, Jesus Christ. Eventually, due to this merger of all these different companies, they decided to found one big company around the time of deregulation in 1985. And they spent months with focus groups and $100,000 and eventually came up with the name Enron, which they didn't know, and I can't believe you didn't look this up. Like, I get it that you didn't have Google, but you damn sure had an encyclopedia somewhere, okay? Enteron is the name of part of the lower intestine. That's gross. Right?
Ew.
Oops. Spent $100,000 and that's what you came up with. But so they eventually just cut out the T and made it Enron. Now, let's talk about Lay's relationship with the Bush family, because it was around this time he started to cultivate that. What they say in the documentary, and in reading all the details, there's so much detail we just can't go into, but reading through it, basically, you really understand that the relationship between Enron and the Bush family, and Ken Lay specifically, is by far and away the most important and consequential relationship between a major corporation and a presidential family. There's so many things and details that they go into about how the Bush family did all kinds of stuff for them and what they did back. Lay made monetary contributions, led several committees in the Republican Party, and he was the co-chairman of H.W. Bush's re-election committee. That's how close they were. Wow. Right? But he made actually some missteps when it came to W. Now, if you remember at the time of the crash, W was president. Right. Had Lay treated W a little bit differently, I have a feeling the story of Enron would have ended differently. But he didn't. Oh. When W was running for Texas governor, Lay didn't believe he was going to win. When he met with him, because everybody had to go at that time, any Texas politician had to go to Ken Lay and kiss the ring to get his approval, right? So when W went to Lay pretty much was like, well, you know, when you don't win, don't let that discourage you from running again. And it was like, oh. Now, belatedly, he got on the bandwagon, but honestly, Bush never forgot that little slight.
Ooh, that's awful.
And had that changed just a teeny tiny little bit, it might have been a whole different story. Yeah. But we'll get there later. So back to Enron's early years. So he convinced the company to move the headquarters back to Houston, which is kind of considered itself the energy capital of the United States. Part of that was because he wanted to be in the capital, quote unquote, but part of it was because of his side piece. At this point, even though he was talking about his Christian values and everybody knows how I have a strong code of moral conduct that is determined by my Christian values, he was banging, of course, the stereotypical mistress, his secretary, of course. He was married to a woman named Judy, with whom he had 2 children. However, he carried on a long-term relationship with a divorced mom of 3 named Linda. When he told his wife he wanted a divorce, it literally broke her. She had a psychological breakdown, and Ken Lay actually had her involuntarily committed to an insane asylum for a while.
That's awful. Wow.
Right? Totally destroyed her.
Yeah, because I'm looking it up right now because I just want to see what this guy looked like because I couldn't remember.
He looks like Elmer Fudd.
Yeah, he looks like a little toad.
He literally looks like Elmer Fudd.
Yeah.
There's no other way to describe it.
And he had been married to that woman since 1966.
Mm-hmm.
That's crazy.
Ditched her for his side piece, right? So don't fucking sit here and talk to me about your Christian values when you're doing that, dumbass. Now, she got out. They ended up kind of settling it, not too amicably. But
because it said on the little thing on Wikipedia or whatever, when it showed it showed him and then it showed like his first wife and his second wife, like he got divorced and married the same exact year.
The same month.
Yeah. So that was, yeah. Oh yeah, it was like March or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Pretty much.
Yeah.
So, but here's the thing that I think, the reason why I bring up, obviously there's the personal aspect that he's, wrapping himself in the Bible, but there's also his ability to kind of smooth out what he's fucked up. He always believed that no matter what the problem, he could throw money at it and smooth it over with some good PR. And that's ultimately kind of what he did with his first wife. his first wife and second wife actually eventually kind of became friends. They would vacation together. They would have Christmases together. Friends would joke that they half expected to see both wives on Kenley's Christmas card because they were so goddamn close. He voluntarily increased his child support and alimony over the years, and eventually it was fine. It really speaks to how he believed if he could fix a relationship with a woman he broke and had committed to an insane asylum, he really felt like he could fix anything
at all. Yeah.
And his history kind of told him that was fucking true.
His God complex.
Exactly. Everybody knew in Enron's culture that Kenley just wanted to be perceived as being a great man. It didn't necessarily matter if he was a great man. And as long as Enron stayed away from what later executives called Kenley's sacred cows, things that didn't violate very specific things, he was okay. But he was a fucking hypocrite. And he actually, especially with the affair thing, jumping ahead a little bit, there's a guy named Rich Kinder who eventually, like after the first big Enron scandal, he really whipped that company into shape and ran it for years, keeping it afloat, right? And the deal was that eventually Kenley would step down as CEO and give him that job. He was promised that job. But Lay, in the end, didn't really want to give it to him. And he blamed it on the board. He said, well, the board won't approve you because you're having an affair with my secretary. And I think you've been having that affair while you both were still married. And it was like, excuse me. And people actually pointed out to the board, why is his affair different than Ken Lay's?
Right.
Why are you keeping that? Like, what the fuck? And they were like, well, it's different when you have an affair with your secretary. It's way different when you have an affair with the boss's secretary. It was like,
oh, because you got to her before the boss could? Basically.
Pretty much. Like, it was fucked up. Like, Kenley was like the biggest hypocrite.
Hi, everyone. Tanya and I would really appreciate it if you could do us a quick favor. Head on over to iTunes and leave a 5-star rating and review. Make sure to select podcast in the top drop-down if you're having trouble finding it. All 5-star reviewers will be admitted into the Quality Star Club and be entered into a drawing for a $50 Amazon gift card every month. Now back to the show.
But back to Lay. This story has a character in it named Mike Muckleroy.
Muckleroy.
Who could be my new favorite human. At first the company was really struggling. Because when deregulation first came out, nobody really knew how to make money off of it. How were you going to change this industry to make money? It wasn't like an overnight thing. They had to figure out how to make money. So the first thing that happened, all these different divisions within Enron were actually losing money. But they had one division that was part of Enron. That was Enron Oil. Gas was not really making them all that much money. It wasn't in the parlance that they kept using. The natural gas market wasn't as sexy as oil, and I don't quite understand why oil is
sexy.
I think what they mean is like natural gas didn't have the capacity at the time to make the money that oil did, right? Now oil trading is like gambling. Basically and once again, this is super complicated as far as the transactions go, so we're not going to get too far down the rabbit hole here, but basically all you need to know is they make bets on whether the price of oil will rise or fall, period, right? So they're saying, I bet $1 million that the price of oil is going to go up.
How the fucking...
Right? Now, the oil traders that were up in New York in a place called Valhalla, that's why they call it the Valhalla scandal. So they had these two guys, Louis Bourget and Tom Mastroeni. They had a limit to how much they could bet, and they had a limit to how much they could lose before they had to pull out, right? But they were making obscene profits, and nobody cared to question it. Profits that if you were actually sticking to your limits, there's no way you could have made. But nobody cared, right? Except one dude, this ex-Navy guy who's a badass, Mike Muckleroy.
Oh, that's the guy.
I love his name. I absolutely love him. And when you watch him, like he looks like he kind of has this like, he reminds me of my grandpa. Just got this southern charm, but definitely like he could snap your neck if you pissed him off.
Right.
Right. He kept pointing out like, this is bad. And nobody cared. The board didn't care. Eventually, he made so much noise that Ken Lay had auditors from within Enron to look at it, right? They did their kind of initial review, and they were like, yeah, they presented it to the board, and they were like, no, you need to get rid of these guys. They're trading way beyond their limits, and this is bad. They're destroying daily trading records, the whole nine. But Ken Lay and the board were like, well, this is the only part of the company making money.
So why would they get rid of that?
Pretty much. So they transferred the investigation to their accounting team, their accounting firm, Arthur Anderson, which basically was like a total whitewash. They were like, yeah, these transactions are unusual, but they're not illegal. And it was like, okay. What the fuck, right? And everybody was kind of just like, okay, cool. Shut down the people that were actually, doing good with the investigation. But McElroy was not like letting it go. And he was hearing from other people in the industry like, oh, you guys were on the wrong side of a bet. You guys lost a lot of money yesterday. And he was like, what are you talking about? And none of the money that other people in the industry were saying they lost were showing up on the balance sheets. So he knew shit was wrong.
Right.
And he kept pushing. And they were like, you're just jealous of their bonuses. And it was like, no.
I'm just not trying to go to prison.
Thank you. Exactly.
Funny like
that. So
that.
eventually Bourget lost like $1 billion.
How do you just lose $1 billion and not think about it?
Because he kept doubling. Every time he lost, he kept doubling down and losing. And he really thought like it's that gambling addict's
I guess
mentality. Like the next win will make up for my previous 10 losses.
Ugh.
But eventually he lost so much money there was no way to dig out of it. So he took this executive to lunch, confessed everything. That dude told some of the other executives. McElroy jumped on a plane up to New York. And he's so funny. He's like, I just had to go up there and find out what kind of gorilla we had loose. He's so funny. So he goes up there. So he stood over Bourget, the trader. He showed him the fake books. He knew they were fake. So he said, unfortunately, in my life, I've had to kill people. And I sleep like a fucking baby. So you're going to bring me the right books, not your doctored books, right now.
See?
It was like, oh, shit.
Oh,
right?
God.
So the next day, he comes in, gives him the real books. McElroy kicks him off the premises, has the locks changed. He's like, you don't come back. And Mike McElroy spends the next few weeks locked in that office with a small team of people that he trusted. And they worked 16-hour days for weeks. And they basically figured out how to bluff the market, which isn't necessarily illegal. It's just because it is like gambling.
It's right.
They made everybody in the market think that they had what they didn't have, right? And he limited the damage to only have lost like $80 million instead of $1 billion,
which is a huge jump.
Oh, here's the other funny thing about this Enron, the Valhalla scandal. Bourget and Mastroeni were also skimming a little off the top. They were stealing, right? But they
stealing what?
I know, right? But they kept claiming all this money was transferred into the account of someone that they referred to as that they had transferred the money to. They referred to as either an English businessman or a Lebanese speculator. But his name, when typed out in all the documents, was Mr. M. Yass. What does that look like?
M-Y-A-S-S. My ass. Oh my God.
And nobody could find this person. I'm like, of course this person doesn't fucking exist. They made him up.
Yeah. Nobody's name is my ass.
They were totally like playing games. Now, when the scandal eventually went public, the board and Ken Lay were like, oh my God, we were shocked. Shocked, I say.
Clutch my pearls.
At total clutch my pearls moment, right? So after the scandal went public, Ken Lay had one of those like all hands like employee meetings where he stood in front of everybody. And he just stood up there and just all indignant and, what's the word I'm looking for? All self-righteous. He says, I knew nothing about what these traders were doing, which is a goddamn lie. And then he says, if anyone can say I didn't, let them speak up now. And 3 people had to physically restrain Mike McElroy from standing up because he's like, motherfucker, I told you what they were doing. They had to like physically hold him down
in his little chair. Just say a word. Just shut up.
They were like, don't.
Just shut up. Just shut up.
To cover their asses, they actually even went so far as to sue the two traders, even though they knew.
They knew what the fuck they were doing.
And they didn't take it to court because obviously in court they would be able. They literally sent a message, an actual physical piece of paper memo to the traders after the investigation saying, please keep making us millions. So there was enough proof that the board and Enron and Ken Lay knew. But by this point, HW was president. And prosecutors who have looked at the evidence since then, that is the only explanation as to why Ken Lay and the board were not charged, or Enron as a whole was not charged. Like, that's the only fucking reason. They knew. Bourget, one of the traders, went to jail. His yes man helper dude got a suspended sentence, whatever. So now you don't have the guys that were making money for Enron. So now what? That brings us to Jeff Skilling. So here's the way I kind of look at it. Ken Lay was not involved in the day-to-day of Enron. In my mind, Ken Lay was the enabler of the disaster. Jeff Skilling was the architect. Like,
really?
This was both of them. Both of them deserve the blame. So Jeff Skilling was born in Pittsburgh in November 25th, 1953. He actually had a job in high school working for a television station at the age of 14, but he managed to get promoted to being a production assistant at the age of fucking 14. Right?
He was a production assistant.
He worked upwards of 50 hours a week while in high school.
What the fuck?
Like, he would go to work right after school. His mom would drive him because he still couldn't drive. He would be there from like 4 until like 2 in the morning.
What the hell?
Like, it was crazy. Now, he ended up saving about $15,000 in the 60s.
That's a lot of money in the 60s.
It's a lot of fucking money. And he lost it all in the stock market, making wild fucking bets. Now, in the 90s, when the internet craze and the stock market was like a big deal, some teenagers would invest. That was not unheard of. But in the 60s?
Yeah, no.
What are you talking about? Now, he ended up getting another summer job that he got injured, right? Like severely injured. He was in a full body cast for months. Oh. He ended up getting a workers' comp check for about $3,500. Lost it all in the stock market as well.
Oh.
Like, lost
what the fuck is wrong with this guy?
He claimed later that he was always a very, very careful when it came, like, he loved taking risks, but it was always very measured and, you know, make sure and weighing the pros and cons, but that wasn't true at all.
No, it looks like a good deal. I'm going to take it. And, I just lost all my money.
He was willing to roll the dice with his money and your money.
Oh.
Like, he didn't give a fuck. He eventually, after college, he married his college sweetheart. Then he applied to Harvard Business School. And this story, I think, is incredibly telling. He got into Harvard Business School because he acted like Jeff Skilling, basically. He met with the dean of Harvard, right? Who the dean met with every candidate that the admissions board was on the fence about because his grades weren't that good, right? And he was like, the interview was basically going nowhere. And finally the dean just looked at him and was like, "Are you smart?" And Jeff Skilling just kind of looked at him and he says, "I am fucking smart." And it's like, wow, that takes a lot of balls to say that to the Harvard dean.
Yeah.
Like, that's crazy. Got in. One classmate of Jeff Skilling's recalls this story that he still denies, but seeing where it ended up, I tend to believe this other classmate, quite frankly. The story was that the professor posed a question. If a product was deemed likely dangerous, but not definitive, what would you as the CEO do? And Skilling said, "I would keep selling the product. It's my job to maximize profits for the shareholders, and it's the government's job to step in if something's dangerous." So, but he also believed that the free market was the ultimate judge of right and wrong. If you don't believe the government should ever step in if something's dangerous, and you're not going to do the right thing just because it's the right thing to do, then what the fuck? Like, it's just crazy. Like, the seeds of what was to happen were there. They were there.
He was just escalating higher and higher and higher.
Totally.
With his crazy.
Absolutely.
Enjoying this episode? Make sure to subscribe to Q as in Cucumber in iTunes or your favorite podcasting platform so you can hear the complete story. The new episodes will be downloaded automatically so you don't miss a thing. Now back to the show.
Now, after graduating from Harvard Business School with an MBA, he went to work for McKinsey & Company, which is a corporate strategic consulting group. This is where some of the most dangerous seeds that would grow into Enron's worst practices were sowed. Like, this is a group that I will admit there are some consultants out there that, you know, come up with ideas and they actually help you implement them. They learn what works, what doesn't. McKinsey doesn't really do that. They just hand out their advice as if it's, you know, gospel delivered from on high and say, go do it. And they flat out say, like, we don't learn from our clients. We only learn from each other. And it's like, well, then how the fuck do you know what works and what doesn't? What they talk about, and this is ultimately the thing that really Jeff Skilling kind of embodies. They are designers of ditches, not diggers of ditches. And if you take their advice and you can't execute, well, that's your fault for not executing it the way that I told you to. You did it wrong. It's your fault, right? Oh. Skilling worked for McKinsey & Company, and he did consulting for Enron. Now, Skilling, when he eventually came to Enron, he took that idea of we just hire the smartest people. Where they don't even, McKinsey doesn't even hire people from within the industries they work for. So people with no experience, let's say in sales, are hired straight out of college, and they figure, well, they're smart, they'll figure it out, right? And they're consulting, but they've never actually had any experience doing dick.
They just know what they learned in school.
Right.
And here, let me try.
And that is something that eventually Skilling really brought into Enron. He really believed. He never brought in people really with experience in anything. He figured, I'm just going to hire a bunch of Harvard MBAs, and they're smart, they'll figure it out. Right? And eventually, like he said what he liked to do was hire guys with spikes. People with incredible education that had something extreme about their personalities. Like Ken Rice, extremely good at glad handing. He was like the salesman of Enron. Made millions upon millions upon millions. But once again, couldn't execute anything. Nothing. All he was good at was selling. That's it. And that is what Skilling filled Enron with. They could design a ditch, but they couldn't dig for shit without causing a cave-in that killed 100 people. A perfect example of this is one day Skilling, right before he quit, went down to a group of one of the divisions within Enron called EES. And he was given one of his little pep talks. And he's like, you know, in a couple of years, you guys are going to be making over $500 million a year for this company. And the people in EES were like, okay, what's the plan to do that? And he says, I don't know. You guys have to figure it out. Like, there was no corporate strategy.
Yeah,
it literally was, we're just going to tell you what the goal is. You figure it out. We don't care what's possible. Just go do it. It's like, okay, great.
Here's the number. Figure it out.
Pretty much.
Just get to it.
So Skilling consulted for Enron. Eventually, he impressed enough people at the top that they brought him over with his good idea. This is the one good idea. It was called the gas bank. Here's how the gas bank worked. And this is really how he figured out how to change the entire market so that everybody could make money with deregulation. Let's say I'm a natural gas producer, and you are a utility company that needs natural gas, right? Enron, let's say Nathan is Enron. Nathan negotiates a contract with me to where I will sell him the gas for the next 5 years at a fixed price. Right. No matter if the price goes up or down with the market, it's a fixed price. right? And let's say that's $1. You sign a contract with Nathan that agrees to buy the gas at a fixed price, no matter what happens to the price of gas, for $2.
Enron keeps the difference of $1. And the reason that they're involved in the transaction is because they agree to use their pipelines to move the gas. So they're guaranteeing delivery. So that's where they come in. And their payment is that $1 difference.
That's how Enron made its money.
Shut up. That's so smart.
And because this didn't really exist, when he talks about it in some of the old videos, he's like, so we became the largest natural gas buyer and seller in North America. I'm like, you're the only one.
Right. So, yeah.
Okay. This is weird. And other companies did follow that model, but that was really his kind of brainchild.
Right.
So that was the one good idea that they were like, everybody loved it because with the volatility in the market and letting gas prices float, a cold snap could cause, consumers to have to spend out the ass.
Right.
But a heat wave could cause gas producers to lose money. This really kind of stabilized the market so that everybody could feel safe and secure. And had they just done that and just been happy with that, it probably would have been fine. But no, wasn't good enough. So that's the gas bank. So they ended up bringing Skilling on into Enron.
Uh-huh.
One of the key things, and this is something really important that we have to explain, to understand one of the major components that caused Enron to go down. It's called mark-to-market.
Mm-hmm.
It is, Skilling demanded that he be allowed to use mark-to-market accounting treatment before he would even join Enron, because he truly believed that you should be able to book profits based off of an idea on the day you have that idea. Otherwise, while you're sitting here waiting, somebody else is potentially getting the profits from your idea because they were able to do it better or faster or whatever, right? He really truly believed this. The way that mark-to-market works is that the day you sign a deal, no matter how much money comes in the door, you can book the profits for that entire deal the day you sign it, right? So if you're saying over the next 10 years, I'm going to make $50 billion, you can book that $50 billion that day.
God.
But now here's the thing is that actually mark-to-market is a useful tool for stock analysts because they have to mark-to-market the evaluation of their stocks every day. They're not saying, here's what my stock is going to be worth in 10 years.
Right.
And that was the only pushback that the SEC had to approving the use of it. They were like, well, how are you going to determine what the value is going to be in 10, even 20 years?
Right.
And they pushed for maybe them to do like a test of it first, but Enron pushed back and this SEC totally caved.
Wow.
Right?
So I go to the bank and I tell them I have an idea and it's worth $50 billion.
And they put $50
and they give you $50 billion.
They don't necessarily give you $15 billion.
But you get that line of credit. Though.
Right.
Yeah.
Pretty much. So if anybody who knows anything about Enron and knows where it ended up, like when people are like, how did this happen? where did all this money go? The money didn't really exist. As far as I can tell,
like
the real money, there is real money that disappeared. The money that people put into their retirement and their savings and all that, that's real money.
Because they thought this was an actual true company.
Right. But honestly, it really wasn't.
Wow.
And it really was Jeff Skilling believing that you can just wing it. So here's the other big problem with mark-to-market. You book all the profits from a big deal in one swoop. But now that only counts for 1/4 of your year. Like whatever quarter that was booked in, that's the only thing it counts for.
So then if you don't do it again, you're going to have lost the next 3 quarters.
Exactly. So, but Enron was promising investors that the company was going to grow at a 15% rate every year, which is astronomical. So even with fake money on the books for 1 quarter, what about the next quarter? So now you're going to have to do two deals just as big in the next quarter. And then 3 deals in the next, and 4 in the next, and 5 in the next. So all Enron eventually cared about was booking deals. Whether they were good deals or bad deals, didn't matter. That's all they cared about. just to cover their asses.
Right.
But even with the shitty deals, they could use them to fill the gaps between the target they promised Wall Street and where they actually were. They would go back to contracts that they signed 5 years ago and would figure out how they could rework them a little bit to squeeze a little bit more onto the books for mark to market.
Oh my God.
Right? So, but as long as the deal was still in place and hadn't been canceled, they could book millions more on the deal to hit the target. So, jumping ahead a little bit, when they did the deal they had with Blockbuster, when the deal they had with Blockbuster, and we'll get into that later, falls apart, Blockbuster was shocked after the bankruptcy to find out that Enron actually had booked $53 million off of that deal they had with them that didn't make a goddamn penny. But here's the thing is Enron could do that without even informing the people they had the deal with that they were doing it. So Blockbuster didn't even know what they were doing. Now, even deals that other companies said were no longer valid, until the papers were signed, they would book more and more profits off of them, arguing that, well, the deal's still on paper. Like, they would go back to some of the guys that basically controlled like the paperwork, and they were like, can we look at that deal again? And they were like, no, it's dead. And they were like, are you sure?
Right.
They're like, no, it's dead. And finally they would get the hint, like, oh, he really wants me to go back and look at this and do it again. And they just kind of would stand over people and push and push and push and push for them to do it. There's a video where they actually mock mark-to-market accounting for like a Enron promotional thing that they did like a skit. Where basically they were sitting down and Jeff Skilling plays like a lowly accountant and he's like, look, in origination, we did $10 million. I think next year we can do $110 million. And it's like, whoa, this is awesome. And it's like, no, that's not really mocking it. That is what it is. Weirdos. Like they presented it as they're mocking it, but really, it's what you do. Totally what you do. So it's fascinating.
This whole thing is crazy.
They turn every department into revenue generators for mark to market. The finance department was turned into a revenue generator, looking over the deals that had already been signed to see how it could be reworked. Now, part of the finance team that was in charge of taxes were also turned into revenue generators. Now, remember that was the big thing at Shoe and at Chucky's, like, we weren't revenue generators. But we kept saying, like, we're revenue protectors.
Right.
Like, we make it so you don't have to spend out the ass in fines because you fucking did it wrong.
We're the ones explaining to the people who are generating money how they can generate more money.
Exactly. But they didn't see that, right? But even the tax department was turned into revenue generators.
What the fuck?
They would find tax loopholes to figure out what they could write off and generate more earnings. For example, again, jumping ahead with when broadband failed, they had a warehouse of about $20 million worth of shit they had bought. The cables and the lines and all this construction equipment. But they told the county that where they should have had to pay property taxes based on the value of what they stored in there, that they only had about $500 worth of furniture and a phone in there, but really they had $20 million worth of shit.
$500 worth of furniture and a phone.
So that's where the tax department became a revenue generator to just figure out how they could squeeze every last fucking dime.
This is not a business. This is a house that I sometimes live in for 8 hours a day.
I know, right? It's
just
like
Monday through Friday.
But he had a bunch of other shortcomings that they did not recognize. One of which was his severe lack of interpersonal skills. He truly believed that people would do whatever he told them to do because it was logical. Like, and countless times other executives would try to explain to him, like, that's not how people will do things simply because they can.
Not just because you tell them to.
And he really believed, like, he believed that as long as he threw money at a problem, they would just do it. And it was like,
yeah, it's not really,
No. We know from our experience that sometimes the money doesn't motivate some people.
No, it's how do I feel in the end or the recognition. Money doesn't always
exactly
do everything for someone.
And he was also, because he had no interpersonal skills and because he couldn't actually execute on anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
He actually became intimidated by a lot of his traders and executives. So they all figured out, while he seemed like the master of the universe, they all figured out that all they had to do was threaten to quit and he'd give them whatever they wanted.
Oh, shut up.
And he hated, like, he wouldn't do confrontation with them. Perfect example is Lupai. Lupai was a guy that he had tapped to run certain divisions within Enron over the years.
Mm-hmm.
Lupai was obsessed with strippers, right?
Bah!
And most of, like, he would go to strip clubs after work every day for fucking hours, and would take guys on the trading floor, customers with him, put it all on Enron's credit cards, right? All of it was paid for by Enron. Did this for years. Now, eventually, like, sometimes they actually, like, one guy tells a story about how they had gone out of town to go to an energy conference.
Uh-huh.
They stepped off the plane and Lou was like, let's go to the strip club. They never even went to the conference. They skipped out on meeting with clients just because so Lupai could go to the strip club.
Wow. That's kind of weird, too.
It's creepy as fuck, right? Now, eventually, Lupai ended up ditching his wife and 2 kids and marrying his stripper girlfriend that had his child, right? Total fucking pig. When they asked him after the collapse, like, how he felt, he was like, I don't care. I'm not feeling anything. It was like,
I got my stripper.
Pretty much. They now raise dressage horses.
What are dressage horses?
Those horses that, like, the horses that Mitt Romney's wife had, that they sit in the saddle and they, like...
Oh, those...
dancing horses.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about now.
The horses that dance, pretty much.
That's weird.
Yeah, it's totally weird. So, eventually, females at the company complained to Ken Lay about having to approve, like, the people in the expense department, having to approve all these charges for strippers and strip clubs. They complained to Ken Lay, and of course, he was like... with the Bible. That couldn't be seen. So he sent out a note to the company saying, we will no longer pay for your strip club excursions, right? And apparently, like, a total silence when that note came out swept over the entire trading floor and nobody said anything. It was like dead silent for 2 days, like, uh-oh, we're in trouble. But Lupai kept doing it for months. And Skilling wouldn't confront him on it at all.
This guy's just still going to the strippers, having a good time.
Oh, yeah. Lupai was still yucking it up on Enron's credit card. Like,
yeah, him and his stripper girlfriend.
And finally, only after Ken Lay kind of threatened Skilling, did Skilling go confront him and say, knock it the fuck off. And Pai was like, but it's the way the old energy gas works. Like, this is what this industry has always done. He's like, the industry's different. Knock it off. But it took months to get him to actually do that. So because he had no ability to actually confront people that were making money and people that could actually execute,
right,
he ended up just being an atrocious fucking manager. Absolutely atrocious. He would say things that made him sound like a visionary, but really it was just the signs of a shitty manager. But it was like this magic spell he had over all these people.
Well, you got to think, somebody in that position who's telling you, hey, this is our vision, now make it come to life. That's basically all he was doing, and people will follow because we're sheep.
Pretty much. So one of the things, imagine if you heard a manager say this at any place you worked. What would be your first thought? Because I know what my first thought would be, but these people thought, oh, that sounds visionary. No, it's fucking not. Here's what he said. I think strategic planning is the antithesis of building a corporation.
Okay, shithead. Strategic planning is the whatever of building any fucking business. You have to plan strategically because there are other businesses out there that do the same fucking thing as you.
You want to know why Enron crashed? Because you said, we're not planning anything. I'm just throwing out numbers and have fun.
Right.
You wonder why? Because you didn't plan.
You didn't plan, stupid.
You didn't plan for shit. Now, even Wall Street was like, that sounds visionary. It's like, no. Because from the outside looking in, it looked like it was working. But if I had said that on a job interview, I'd have been laughed out the fucking room. It would have been like, okay. But it was his ability to make you believe whatever he said and make you ignore reality. Like, He presented to the market and investors that Enron was a new kind of business that was changing the world and where good ideas could flourish, and it was a well-oiled machine, and everyone bought it. But on the inside, because it was just a bunch of smart people who couldn't execute for shit, they could run over skilling at the threat of quitting, and it was total chaos.
The most ridiculous shit I've ever heard in my life.
Like what you hear? Rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes or your favorite podcasting platform. And follow us on our Facebook page by searching Q as in Cucumber. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram by searching QAIC_Lara, LARA, and QAIC_Tanya, TANYA. Don't forget to check out our other show, hosted by me and Jessica James, called The Parent Memoirs. And we want to hear from you. Share your stories by emailing us at qasincucumber@yahoo.com, and you might just hear your stories on a future episode. Love your faces.
This call may be monitored and recorded for quality assurance.